Hello and welcome to Lit Illuminated. This is a space for us to talk about books and the way that they connect us to ourselves and to the world around us. Today we are talking about Lidia Yuknavitch's memoir, Reading the Waves. As someone who loves memoir and the ways that stories weave together, I'm so surprised that it took me so long to find Yuknavitch's work. It was only a couple years ago when I fell into her first memoir, The Chronology of Water, which I think came out in 2010. So it had been out there a while, 20 some years before I actually gained access to it or even found out about it. So, and I fell in love with that book. And so when I saw that her newest one, Reading the Waves, was coming out, I immediately pre-ordered it and couldn't wait to get it. And this book was one that in some level I wanted to speed through and just get to the end, and the other part of me just really wanted to savor each moment. And so I did spend a little time slowing myself down to go through this book. And as a fellow lover of water in all its forms, oceans, rivers, lakes, rain, I am so drawn to Yuknavitch's writing and the way that she takes the reader into water with her, the way that story and water flow and circulate around her throughout her life, physically, spiritually, mentally. It's so evident in who she is that water is such a part of her. And this memoir is both fluid, like the waters that run through it, and grounded, rooted in her body, in the bodies of those she loves, and in place. And it reminds us that it takes both the fluid and the groundedness to be human and to journey through all the various stages of life from birth, trauma, love, death, growth, grief, joy, guilt, sorrow. It's all the spaces of being and becoming. And you feel that in each of these pages of this memoir. The first line of the book, and I'm going to just read it to you. I have a bunch of quotes that I want to share with you today to kind of just give a hint of how this book is setting us up for some of those things, that fluid and that groundedness. I think that's really, for me, a theme that I'm following through that's important. But the very first sentence is, this is not a hero's journey or a traditional memoir, though travel and memory and storytelling are all in these pages. So she sets it up right away. Like, this is not a journey of like my hero journey from A to B or how I went through this. And it's not a traditional memoir. And it does go through travel and memory, but that's not what it is. That there's storytelling in all of the pages. And so I felt like this preface that she started with was so swoon worthy. And I think that's what I texted my friends. I was like, swoon, I love this. I wanted to savor it, take my time underlining and writing notes in there and just spending time with how she was setting this up. And the preface is called A Return. And I think in some way her two memoirs are in conversation with each other, which I think is beautiful, but they are also standalone. And so I mentioned how water is so important to Lydia's life and how she's, sharing this. And I have two quotes that I want to share about water that really stood out to me, but there's so much in here. I feel like you need to like work through the book itself to go through those waves of the water in the memoir itself. But the one quote is towards the end that stood out to me, that like hit again with how she's writing about the places of water and the bodies of water that surround her, that have been part of her, that is connecting her to others and memories to others. And this was one that used the analogy of water instead of the physical water. And this quote is on page 198. Loving a drinker is like loving a river, always leaving you for the ocean. Just a beautiful way to bring water into the narrative in a different way. There's a scene where she's going into the water. Her husband's taking a video of her, and the waves are crashing and this whole thing. And as she jumps in, the quotes, and this is on 162, I swim hard into the mad surf. For a moment, I think you could just keep swimming. And I also think you could drown, the past and the present becoming fluid. And this is another space where the water, she's in the water, but it also brings in that presence of time, of future self, past self, and this fluid nature of what that means. And we see this throughout as we dive in and out of memory. Just realize the term I just used there, and how she takes us through her narratives in these are like waves of chapters that we dive in and out and in and out of where she is. We get different reflections of where we are in her timeline. And so you feel like you're in this movement. You're also being like moved along with the water and with the story. It's just beautiful. There are some places here where she talks about how memory works, which I think is so interesting when you're talking about a memoir. And I remember this in even one of mine that I wrote about. I'm sure my sister was there, but I don't remember, right? And she actually had a line like there. She's like, I left my sister out of this story because I don't remember her being there. I don't know why. And it's one of those spaces where you're like, I know they had to be there, but I don't remember. And it was interesting. Again, this is where I had some very interesting for myself parallels between my own writing process and my memoir that's out there and this one. And that moment where she said, I didn't put my sister in here, it was also at like a funeral. It was around the death of somebody. And I was like, that is when I couldn't remember either. And so I feel like a lot of times when we are going through a trauma or there's some grief involved that we don't remember, but we know that they have to be there. There's another section where she brings up this idea of a gap in memory. And I love that as a writer, she's just honest in that space of where those gaps are. So we just looked at that one with her sister. It was a death in the family. It was their cousin, but she doesn't remember her sister being there. She must have been there, but she doesn't remember. So she doesn't write about her sister. And then there's this one that also brings another way of looking at the gap in memory. And this quote is on page 59. I don't remember what year my divorce from my first husband happened. As if the years from my daughter's death in 1983 to the moment I met Devin have been overwritten. And I thought that was a beautiful way to talk about the pause that happens in memory and the way that grief can create those pauses and that the idea of it being overwritten. It existed, but it's been overwritten, much I think again like of tapes. I'm from that generation where you record over a tape, so there was something there, and then you just re-record over it, and so what was there is lost, never to be found again. And no matter how much you try to go back to it, it's already been written over. And so I thought that was really interesting. Another one that I found lovely about how the way memory works, and this is also linking to, I'm going to talk about how she puts us in the sense of the body. And this is on page 86. Who might we become if we let our memories prism, if we let go of the stories that bind us? And this real sense of how stories link us. And this is something I've been talking about in this podcast for a while, that we come into story in different ways. We interact with it in our way, and then people come and interact with it in another, especially when we're telling our own stories and how that links us. And then also a story about how our lives, when you're reading memoir, are actually linked to others, and what binds us in those spaces, what happens when we move away from those, what happens when we are willing to release or hold. So much of this book is talking about how bodily she has experienced life And some of that is the keeping of others into that space and the process of learning and letting go. So that leads me to the next section that I felt like, wow, this book is so rooted in water and this idea of the fluid nature of life. It is also super grounded, not only in herself as a body, but in the place. So she often gives us a real sense of where place is. She'll talk about the trees, what's happening there, and you can understand her movement through time and place. But this real sense of the body and this kind of rootedness in experience. And so again, on that very first page, she says, I believe our bodies are carriers of experience. And I felt like that was, bam, this is where we're going, right? Like our bodies carry our experience. And now I'm going to talk to you about it in this memoir. And this quote is on page 4. Rocks carry sediment from all over the world. They change shape, they form or dissolve, they comfort us. The past, realized and remembered, can be heavy or small enough to carry in your palm or pocket. And I just, as somebody who collects rocks, I love this way she's talking about rocks paralleling our own lives, that we can become heavy, our experience can be small and carried in the palm of your hand. It can be dense and overwhelming, but at the same time, we're changing shape. The water's forming us, helping us shape as in life, and we are becoming and belonging. This whole process of what life is and how we are shaped and formed by life is much like a rock itself. And so it just made me think about all those different rocks that I pick up and the lifetimes that they have in them already. And now they're sitting in my hand. Oh, just such a beautiful way to link together that real bodily space that she talks about in this book, as well as the power of the water to change us, to change the rocks, to form and develop. And we think about how our experiences are like the waves, like the water, and they form and develop us to who we are and the people around us. Again, just so beautiful. So then on, I think it's page 37. This echo is and isn't me. The deaths are not the same, but they make an intersection of deaths in my body anyway. And I think this idea of echoing and how things come back and forth to us in time, and then how we hold them or how we decide to hold them, and if we decide to hold them in our body. And the fact that she took this echo and talked about how that it wasn't the same, but that it was still in her body anyway, I thought was another great way that she continues to bring the reader back to this concept of how the body holds experience, whether it is ours or someone else's. And she talks about this, about the way that we, can carry, we can release. It's just an ongoing theme within the book. So there's 2 quotes that I want to leave you with today that I feel continue to encapsulate how she takes us through this understanding of the body and how we are shaped and how we decide what we carry, much like what we get in that water space as well. And this one is on page 187. And the quote is, "No one knows where stories will go in a body." And this is just beautiful. The idea that this is her telling us stories about her life. This is a memoir where we are moving into her space. And at the same time, recognizing that as we are walking through our life, we are building story and that we don't know where they're going to end up in the body. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. I think about how we carry things from our past, from our ancestral past, and where it sits on our body, and how to decide if you're going to keep carrying it, if it's yours to carry anyway. Just constantly thinking about, it's more than just my life and my experience, but it's also the past within me. And I need to decide what is mine to carry and what isn't mine to carry. And the last quote I want to share, this is kind of like a little bit about those gaps that I talked about before, gaps in memory, but it's different in a way that we are still who we are in those gaps. So in the, I don't know why I didn't put my sister in here because I don't know where she was. I don't remember it, to the, it got overwritten. I like, it obviously happened, but I don't fully remember, or I don't want to go back into that time or that remembering. And this is another space of those gaps, but it's different. And so the quote is on 180. I didn't say anything all the way home, although I'm not sure that's accurate, because what lived between us inside the silence of the drive was my whole life. And so in that, the silence carries her life, carries the space of that. It's a gap because there's nothing shared there in language, but the experience and the presence was still there. Yeah, I I really would highly recommend you grabbing this book, Reading the Waves. It has impacted me, and I think because some of the themes that I was thinking about in my own life, of the things that I carry, the bodily as well, but also the shaping and reshaping that happens throughout our lives, and the way that we are intimately connected to nature as well, and rooted in place. So not only are we rooted in body, but we are rooted in place. But there's also, in addition to that, a fluid nature. We have agency to move and to change and develop and to become. You're not rooted and stuck. You are rooted and grounded. However, you also have that space to move to in the fluid nature of life, and that there is this ebb and flow. There are waves, right? Highs and lows. It was beautiful. Highly recommend it. I thank you so much for joining me today as I tried my best to tell you how much this book impacted me and the things that I loved about it, and to just reiterate the idea that this takes us on what it means to be human, all aspects of that, the joy, the sorrow, the death, the love, and the birth and life. It was just beautiful. So I encourage you to check it out. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.